and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who would like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Helen. How are you?
I am very well. How are you?
I'm wonderfully well. Thank you very much.
Good.
Looking forward to another podcast episode today.
Yes. I'm feeling hopeful that we will explore a new topic.
Very good. You're giving us a little clue there, aren't you?
Yes. What are we talking about?
Today we are talking about hope. Yeah. The reason I wanted to talk about hope was we've talked previously on a couple of episodes about positive psychology and via character strengths. And I've engaged with the via character strengths. Obviously, we train it on our transformational coaching diploma, but I've taken it a few times as early as 2019, and I've done it just recently. And this is obviously a positive psychology intervention.
Yep.
So it's the via character strengths profile, and it's an online test that you can do, and it was devised by Martin Seligman, who's the granddaddy of positive psychology, and Chris Peterson, and it invites individuals to answer questions about 24 different character strengths that they've identified as perhaps being important. So things like kindness, prudence, perseverance, that sort of thing. And one of them is hope. So I had a bit of a realization around hope.
Okay, so we talked about I say via, you say via, character strengths briefly a couple of episodes ago when we were talking about strengths. So for any listeners wanting to know more, just have a listen to episode 147. So what was this realisation that you've come to about hope then?
It moves about a bit, really.
Okay, say more.
Well, let me tell you about what hope is in terms of via character strengths and what the authors meant by it. So their short descriptor that appears on the strengths report that you receive, having completed it, is expecting the best in the future and working to achieve it, believing that a good future is something that can be brought about. Okay. So in their eyes, hope has to do with positive expectations about the future, involves optimistic thinking and focusing on good things to come. So they see it more than just a feel-good emotion, more of a action-orientated strength, so involving a sense of agency, the motivation and the confidence to move forward towards a desired outcome. So, and also that we've got potentially different pathways that we can follow to actually get to that outcome. So, interestingly, within the literature, the via character strengths literature, they seem to have optimism and hope as interchangeable, and I think they are different things.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, but they talk about hope and then in the same paragraphs swap it for optimism, and So anyway, so I think that's a bit of a mistake, but
I mean, I think so. But what are your reasons for understanding the difference between the two?
I think optimism can just be more of a trite sort of, I'm generally optimistic. Everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Whereas hope is more of an embodied kind of sense of, there's an emotion attached to it. It's more of a deeply felt thing, I think.
I would agree with you on that. And I do remember having a brief conversation with my sister-in-law about hope a couple of years ago so she's from Sudan, and when everything was happening in Sudan, and it's still happening now, but her family had fled and she'd been living in this country for a long time, but we talked about hope, and there was definitely it was much deeper than optimism. Yeah. But maybe I'll mention that
and it's almost the flip side of despair, hope, whereas I think optimism isn't.
That's right, yeah.
So again, despair is a much deeper felt thing, isn't it, than being pessimistic or negative.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's used interchangeably in positive psychology because there's studies around pessimism as a character trait and optimism as a character trait, and the fact that you are usually one or the other.
Yeah. And so we talk about character strengths. And
Yeah.
you could say, well, that's going to a certain extent depend on your personality and your traits, but there's something about it being a strength that it's useful to explore. So anyway, going back to what I was saying about the realization. So I've carried out this test again recently, and was reflecting on the story I'd started to tell about previous times that I'd done it. So back in 2019, I did it. So that was March 2019. And everything more or less stays the same on these tests. So it's quite reliable in that sense that if you do it again, you're likely to get a very similar outcome. So my character strength of love always shows up near the top. The latest time it's shown up right at the top. Love of learning always shows up at the top. Kind of perseverance it tends to come down the bottom somewhere. That prudence tends to be at the bottom somewhere. So it's fairly reliable and stable in that sense. So what was interesting in 2019 was that hope was 13th on the list in 2019. And then in 2020, it went up to 6th. So suddenly like towards the top of my character strengths. And I couldn't quite work out what that was. But in telling the story, I imagined that it was because of COVID.
Yep.
That actually, in 2019, I had no need for hope. Like, I'm generally optimistic anyway. I didn't need to engage with hope because things were going well. In 2020, everything had stopped. Like, my business world was over. Everyone had cancelled everything or at least suspended it. So there was a much more of a need for hope. So that was my explanation of why that had shifted about a bit. Until I realised in doing it again, I kind of went back and revisited it and realised that in 2020, I'd actually done it again in January 2020. Before COVID. So it definitely wasn't that. And then in thinking about it, between March 2019 and January 2020, my nephew was ill, seriously ill, and things weren't looking good by January 2020. So that's where the hope sat, I think.
You had that need for hope.
Need for hope.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what I say. It's a much deeper thing than just optimism.
Yes.
So like faced with despair, hope comes in and kind of bolsters a bit, gives us something beyond despair, doesn't it? So I think those two sit side by side. And it's definitely something that comes up, that surfaces for us as humans, that we kind of need that sense of hope. So you talk about your sister-in-law and the situation in Sudan. There is a need within us to have some hope, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And she was talking about how that hope changed. So there was despair and I think they can sit alongside each other, and how, because her mum was still in Sudan and her sister was, and their hope for maintaining their home there was gone. But their hope for survival and finding a new home somewhere else had to be ignited.
Yeah.
And so the hope was still there, but the outcome was different.
Yeah.
And that's why I find it interesting that definition about hope for a potential outcome, as a potential in the future, I don't think that needs to stay fixed. There has to be hope for something, but I think that something can change.
Yeah. And obviously in the medical world, our doctors are dealing with this all of the time, aren't they? Patients come in and they've got a problem, a lump or something, and suddenly there's anxiety, worry, and then potentially if there's a diagnosis that isn't particularly helpful, there might well be a sense of despair. But then also that sense of hope that things will turn out well. But it's just a difficult path to, and this is where I think as a character strength is a really interesting thing to explore, because I don't think you can say, well, you've got it and you haven't.
No.
It's just something that surfaces when we're in times of struggle.
I wonder if it's just one of those things that's part of the human condition, that there is hope in everyone, and in everything. But then I have refined my thinking around values in over the years, and I think that we all have almost all the values within us, but the ones that are most pertinent rise to the surface at that time, or the ones perhaps that are most challenged rise to the surface when they're when they're challenged, if they're important to us.
Yeah.
But if they're values that we've already materialised, that are already part of our lives, they can sit further down because they're not so needed near the forefront of our minds.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's the same with hope.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this before on a podcast, got that idea that, well, why not tell ourselves a good story with a successful outcome? Let's sit with that for a while. But in the absence of knowing, so in the medical world, people are constantly faced with situations they don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
So maybe in terms of that character strength, if you can engage with hope, and let's assume the outcome is going to be successful and positive, that's a better place to be than sitting with the worry, the anxiety, the despair of it all being hopeless and there's nothing can be done. So from a well-being perspective, probably better to engage with hope than despair.
Yeah. And having fairly recently been in that situation where I have told myself more hopeful stories about outcomes, not sitting with that hope, telling yourself, not allowing yourself to tell the positive story, or it's just too painful to sit with the opposite. It's too hard. It's too big.
Yeah, and I know some people will, maybe have a negativity bias, and are pessimistic. Will say, well, it always turns out for the worst anyway, so I might as well just accept that that's how it's going to be, and then I won't be disappointed.
Maybe.
Which is a way of looking at it, isn't it?
It is.
And maybe you don't get the highs and lows that would come from having positive expectations and then it not working out that way. But I think from a well-being perspective, if we can engage with hope. Now, within positive psychology, the concept of hope is more about things that we can control. So there is a hope theory. So Rick Snyder, or Charles Snyder, I think he's called Rick to his friends. Rick Snyder's hope theory suggests it's both a cognitive and emotional framework and has three components. So one is a goal. One is a pathway to get to the goal, or several pathways to get to the goal. And one is a sense of agency. So those three things combined give you hope.
Interesting.
But that is very much about things that can be controlled.
Yeah, and this is where I really struggle sometimes with academic definitions of things, because I think if you went to the general person in the street and said, what is hope? They would be more likely to define a scenario where they don't have control, because that's where hope's needed.
Yeah.
That's where you need something to cling on to.
Yeah.
So I think maybe there's two ways of looking at hope, or maybe, I don't know, the academics have got it wrong.
Yeah.
Just,
But maybe, there are more events in the world that we have some agency over for ourselves than we give ourselves credit for.
Maybe.
So, things that we might choose to protest about, but we don't protest because we don't think it will do any good, could well be something that if we have a sense of hope in that psychological sense, that positive psychology sense of, okay, what is it? What's the goal here? Even if it's like a global goal, what's the goal? And what are the potential pathways to bring that about? And what can I be doing? What's my sense of agency to contribute towards that? So I think maybe if we have more of a sense of us playing our part, that's possible, that we would be more involved with
maybe
events and movements.
Interesting.
Yeah. Coming back to what we were saying, I think when we're faced with people in the coaching room, I think hope can only really come about from a place of safety, from a place of being centered. And I think that's work we can do in the coaching room to help someone to get to a good place. So if they come in a in a sympathetic, nervous response of fight or flight, I can't do anything about this, is impossible, I can't do anything, and just agitated, they're not going to do their clear thinking about possible pathways and actions they can take. So if we can help them as a coach to become grounded, become centered, and to think properly about the situation. So we're bringing them back to that homeostasis of, okay, let's just breathe and let's just think about this properly. And I think from there, hope can start to emerge.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if we find ourselves in a situation that maybe we feel overwhelmed, maybe we feel desperate about something that's happening, much more difficult to get to a place of agency if we're in that state. So maybe it is a changing of the state of despair to a state of, well, there is some hope here. Let's work with that.
Or even from a state of despair to a state of calm in which we can perhaps...
Yeah, and I think there is a danger perhaps of moving too quickly from a state of despair and not honouring that when people come in. If we're taking a purely positive psychology approach of, okay, well, let's focus on what we can do and let's look on the positive side. I think if we move too quickly, we really want people to feel heard, listened to, respected. And I think if we respect where they are and allow them to get to that place of being centered, and then they can start to explore what comes next.
Absolutely. And I think actually what people often don't see about positive psychology is the second wave of positive psychology, which was let's focus on the negative emotions and let's honour them and let's see what we can learn from them. But that's very much often overlooked. It's not advertised, I suppose. People don't write about that, the negative emotions in positive psychology. So yes, sitting with that, honouring it, taking what you need from it, taking what you can learn, and then seeing where we can move to with it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. So I think hope can emerge within the coaching room when someone comes in a state of, say, overwhelm or despair. Then we can do good work to at least sit with them whilst they tell their story and let us know everything that's going on, but also to give them that sense of calm and, okay, you're in a safe place. Let's explore this.
Yeah.
Realistically, but also look at what can be done, or how you can think differently about it.
Yeah.
Even if nothing can be done, how might you engage with this in a different way?
It's interesting because all the time you've been talking about hope, and I've always seen hope as a candlelight. I'm very visual, and it's almost like it can grow bright and it can grow dim, and sometimes it can get knocked around in the storm and the flame can flicker. And it's almost like by creating this beautiful space in the coaching room where we can honour those feelings of panic or despair or whatever else comes up, we're allowing that space for the winds to stop, the flame to get strong again, and perhaps to glow brighter, and for them to use that to find their new way forward, potentially.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those, we're talking more broadly about character strengths, but I think hope is one of those things that we're not going to talk explicitly about what we're doing. So we're not going to bring in Rick Snyder's theory of hope, are we? We're not.
No.
We're going to hold that space for someone to allow the hope to emerge.
Yeah. Not say, but let's talk about hope today. But hopefully this conversation will maybe allow our coaches to think this is the hope conversation. How can I hold this space so that people can learn from it or grow from it or just get to a better place with it?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting for me is that this conversation has come about because I've redone my bio-character strengths and hope has moved about again. So it's part of a broader picture of character strengths, but not something that I see as one of my character strengths. It sort of sits in the middle. It rose under those circumstances. But I think that's probably normal for people.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm sure some people must have hope at the top. But maybe that's circumstance. It's contextual based on their need for hope. But it's an interesting idea, isn't it, that hope is a character strength that you either have or you don't have, or is well played or not underplayed, whatever. It's an interesting concept to have in amongst all those other strengths.
Yeah.
I think I probably would more naturally put optimism in there as a character strength.
Yes. I think that maybe if we were doing the research, it would be different.
Yeah. Yes. So, and there is no mention in that research, that positive psychology research, about things that people have no control over. It is more about, well, what are the potential pathways? What is your agency in this? Well, if you if it's outside your control or even outside your influence, then hope is what you're left with, isn't it?
It is. And maybe that speaks to, again, that idea that psychology research often sits in a place of privilege.
Yeah.
And looks at people who are already okay, which positive psychology is about, isn't it? Where you're already okay. But how do you move beyond that? And maybe someone who is sitting in a war zone doesn't fall into that category. So maybe it's one of the challenges of even modern psychological research.
Yeah. But I think people in war zones, again, there's going to be that fluctuation between despair and hope. I think hope will always surface, won't it? And there will always be, maybe something will change. But it possibly outside of your control, but you would still hope that something, one day it will be over, while still facing the daily, perhaps, despair of the situation that you're in.
Yeah.
Good. I feel like we're ending on a
bit of a low note.
A low note. Let's not do that. So I think what I want to say about this is, I say it's come from a place of, okay, let's look at via character strengths and how are they useful in the coaching room. And we'll talk more about those in future episodes. But what was interesting for me is this oddness that hope sits in a strange place. And maybe it isn't necessarily a character strength, but something that's part of all of us that will surface when the time arises, when it's needed, that will surface. And certainly within the coaching room, we can help to nurture a sense of hope by just holding the space for someone, allowing them to talk about the struggle they're facing, allowing them to get to a safe space, a space of calm, and then for the hope to emerge from there as part of their whole.
Yeah.
Oh, look at me being all spiritual and...
I told you.
Good.
Thank you for bringing that topic to the podcast.
Feels like a useful topic to explore.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Next time on the podcast, we are going to be talking about a topic that you might not associate us with, because we've said before that we're not particularly goal-setting coaches. We're not goal-focused coaches. We're more about the development side of things. So next time we're going to talk a little bit about goal-setting and planning.
Well, yeah, and it is an important part of coaching. So
yeah.
I don't deny the existence of it in the coaching room and the importance of it. So it'll be a good conversation.
Absolutely. So we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.